Julie Hirigoyen is CEO of the UK Green Building Council and has been involved with sustainable development for over 20 years. So, Julie, you coordinated the industry's involvement in the global climate change strike on September the 20th last year, which was hugely successful and seemed to mark a real turning point. Did you feel that then, and do you feel that now?
Yeah, I do. I mean, 2019 definitely feels and felt like a major turning point, actually, on where citizens around the world woke up to the climate emergency and demanded more action. And a lot of that, of course, was driven by, the school children led by Greta Thunberg and the more radical groups like Extinction Rebellion and various others around the world taking to the streets. But I think what marked the 20th of September date out for us was very much the strong call from the school children for grown-ups, as they called us, to get involved. That included their parents, their teachers, citizens, concerned community citizens alike. And the ask was really clear. So I decided that we should get involved as a charity that stands for, or that has a mission to radically improve the sustainability of the built environment. I thought, how can we not? And so I did something that we hadn't done before, which was to call on our members to join us in a moment of activism, I suppose. Mostly corporate members that span the whole of the built environment value chain. So I really didn't know how that would be received. I suppose I feared a little bit I might receive my own P45. But what took place was really amazing, actually. We had, as you know, several hundreds of people join us outside the building centre, but also in cities around the UK. Planners, architects, engineers, developers, investors, occupiers, you name it, not the sort of people necessarily that one would typically have pointed to as taking, sort of radical activist stance, and all coming together with their banners and calling for urgent change and themselves committing to action. So I'm fairly convinced that had I done that a couple of years prior, we probably would have had several members pulling out of our membership. We certainly wouldn't have had the hundreds of people join us on the streets that I think that we did. And I actually think it was a real turning point. Many of our members and organisations far and wide were sort of looking for something to sort of help them organise themselves to do something. I think the word strike wasn't very helpful for many businesses, and they wanted really that moment of collaboration. Whereas an industry, they could say, the built environment is right at the heart of this and we need to do something. So, yeah, I think really, really important moment in time, that.
Yes, it was very exciting to see the crescent outside the building centre just full of people that day.
Yeah.
But to bring us more up to date, I mean, following the recent spending review, you're clearly happy that the climate emergency seems to be gaining traction in the Treasury. But Boris's 10-point plan seems to be going in the right direction, although it has been described as a wish list rather than a strategy. Are you optimistic that that list can be delivered?
I think it's important to start with recognising just how much political will has shifted in the direction of, trying to tackle the climate emergency. I think a couple of years ago, climate wasn't ever really making it into the Prime Minister's speeches, let alone Treasury. It was very much left to the relevant departments, ministerial briefs to kind of to talk about that. And then of course we had the turning point where the government committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And I think since then we have seen a bit of a change of heart. And certainly now this year we've had the Chancellor putting green jobs, green growth right at the heart of the economic recovery ambitions from COVID, and the PM announcing this 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So some pretty strong words there. I think given that context, I'd say that we're relieved rather than happy that climate policy finally is making it onto the agenda for number 10 and the Treasury in particular. But of course, we remain convinced that there's so much more to do. And I think the challenge with the 10-point plan or the spending review or even the announcements back in July are that they are still seen as, we have so many policy gaps in our sort of race to net zero carbon emissions that it's hard to look at these announcements on their own and think, you know, that they're simply not going to get us there, even if we do achieve those. We need, you know, almost every single government decision, every single policy needs to be put through the lens of a kind of net zero, you know, outcome based, you know, scrutiny. And that's clearly not happening. And we had the example earlier of just even the planning reforms, you know, not necessarily as aligned with, or at least demonstrating how that whole systemic reform would drive a net zero carbon agenda. So I think great that we have some ambition, great that it's on, you know, the cards for some of these sort of central government departments. Is it enough? Absolutely not. And I think more to the point, we need far greater integration and, you know, almost kind of systematic policy change across every single department for us to really feel confident that we're making progress in the areas that we need to fast enough.
But I guess a big incentive for the government to take some action will be COP26 up in Glasgow. So it's on our doorstep. How will you be engaging with COP26, and will you be coordinating the World GBC's engagement with it?
We're not so much coordinating World GBC's engagement, but we are, of course, going to be working really closely together. We, together with World GBC and the leaders of 8 or 9 other global institutions, recently signed a letter calling on Alok Sharma as the COP26 president to request a built environment day, specifically at the Climate Summit in November 2021. And that will be dedicated to sort of exploring the action pathways needed to kind of fully decarbonize the whole of the built environment, and to demonstrate how both business and government need to work in partnership to sort of achieve that. So we're really hopeful that we might have such a day. We're working at UK GBC on probably 2 of our biggest initiatives in advance of COP26. One is and this is again alongside at least 10 other green building councils across Europe with World GBC's support. We're working on proposals to develop a net zero whole life carbon roadmap for the UK, for the built environment sector. And this very much speaks to the COP26 office's kind of calls for, you know, sector by sector roadmaps to fully decarbonize, you know, the individual industry sectors as a whole. So this roadmap is really about setting out kind of roles, responsibilities, timelines, actions that all the different stakeholders need to take, and to complement other sectoral roadmaps. Right, we're seeing the British Retail Consortium recently came out with its own roadmap. The water industry has now come up with one, and we're also seeing concrete, steel and various other very related sectors come up with their own. So we need to knit these all together and make sure that they all speak to one another and that there's consistency and comparability between them. And crucially, this is very much needs to be a sort of consensus-based kind of co-owned process. So bringing both the government and the industry together to understand, you know, what needs to be done by when. I think we really need that level of kind of collaboration between public and private sector to really achieve what we're trying to achieve. So that's the first big piece of work which we hope to launch at COP26 and hopefully at this Built Environment Day. And then the second initiative is really an ongoing one, which is, again, working very closely with the World Green Building Council to encourage as many organisations as possible to sign up to the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, which is effectively signatories are saying all our carbon emissions from the buildings that we control and or occupy or manage or that are within our control, we will ensure that those are net zero carbon by 2030, and we will use our influence to advocate for much wider change within the built environment sector. And this is really important, not just for built environment businesses, but actually for all of us, right? Because we all occupy space of one form or another. So of course, we, as you know, as joint tenants at the building centre, we're hopeful that we've signed up to it, and we're hopeful that you know, the building centre as a whole will achieve that. But if occupiers by, you know, wide and large signed up to such a commitment, then you'd start to get the market demand for really quite different types of space and buildings. And that would mean the built environment industry has to deliver those. And it would be a much more powerful stimulus for change. So those are the two sort of big initiatives that we're hoping to showcase at COP26. We have already 30 or so UK GBC members signed up to that commitment, and we're hoping to get many hundreds, if not thousands, signed up to the commitment by that point.
So 2021 should be quite an exciting year. But perhaps at a more mundane level, I mean, it would seem the biggest challenge that faces the industry is to retrofit existing buildings, and the government's put 3 billion towards that. Is that enough? And how on earth do we deliver energy efficient homes with all the complexity that entails in an industry that is facing major skill and number shortages at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right to say that probably retrofitting existing buildings, particularly homes, is probably our single biggest challenge, certainly as a sector in achieving net zero carbon. We've got some 29 million of some of the draftiest homes in Europe. We need to be retrofitting probably about 1.8 of those a minute between now and 2050 to get them to net zero carbon. It's a statistic that we use quite frequently because we're clearly not doing anywhere close to that yet. So we're very far from having a policy framework that is commensurate to the scale and urgency of that kind of challenge. But every little counts. So it's encouraging to see that there has been finally a commitment to upgrading existing homes coming through in the spending review, in the announcements, Chancellor's announcements in the summer, and then subsequently also reiterated in the 10-point plan and in the spending review. So clearly, recognition that this is an area of focus. The £3 billion already recently announced, of course, is only part of the £9 billion that was already committed in the Conservative manifesto for this challenge. So perhaps not additional to that yet, but time will tell. We're not entirely clear on that. I think more important than the absolute amount is perhaps the fact that what we really need is certainty, funding and policy certainty that this will go well beyond the next financial year, which is kind of the time horizons that we're looking at the moment, in order to, as you say, let the industry give it the confidence that it needs to, invest in its workforce, to hire more staff, to develop supply chains and skills and so on. And of course, cash alone doesn't do it, isn't going to fix it, although it will help. We need structural incentives as well to boost consumer demand for green homes. So, attractive financing options, variable stamp duty is something that we've called for a number of times, to make greener homes cheaper to buy. Those sorts of things, along with maybe reduced VAT on home renovation works, things that will encourage homeowners and home occupiers to make their homes warmer, more comfortable, and to actually go down this route. So the other thing that we're working on very, very closely at UK GBC is really to boost the capacity, skills and resources available at a local level. So the local authorities and combined authorities are crucial to delivering against this challenge. We've recently launched both an interactive sort of policy map from many of the local and combined authorities across the UK, or across England actually, currently in the map, and what their retrofit policies and plans consist of in order to sort of facilitate that knowledge sharing between them. And we've also supplemented that with a playbook, a policy retrofit playbook, which is really intended to be a sort of support, to support local authorities in kind of rolling out, ambitious programs across their localities. So really, really important role that they have to play. We've seen a commitment to sort of levelling up recently. This should be part of that. We need, this is a challenge that needs action at every single level, national, local, finance, and many others as well. So yeah, huge challenge, but hopefully we're starting to see some progress.
Very good, Judy. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. It's great to see the public sector as well as the private sector are really now behind the messages that you're promulgating. So thank you very much indeed.
Very welcome. Thank you.